it's anybody's guess on what that future looks like, but these kind of early activities and investments by the larger traditional energy companies are an indication that the market eventually would move towards more distributed sort of framework.
Hi everyone, thanks for watching Dicoscopy TV. Today we've interviewed Mr. Ravi Manghani, who is the director of GTM Research, and he will tell us what is happening on global energy storage markets. Hi Ravi, thanks for taking interview with Dicoscopy TV. So we know that you've just wrote a report about the global energy storage around the world in about 2017, and also there's a forecast of 2018 as well. So do you mind to tell us how will you evaluate the global energy storage around the world in 2017? And also can you evaluate especially in China part?
Excellent. So as you would know, energy storage is a fairly new or nascent technology, which means it is still relatively small even when you compare it to wind and solar or other forms of generation. Which makes it more exciting, which is great. So in 2017, we saw about 1.4 gigawatts of deployments globally. And most of those deployments were focused in 3 or 4 major markets. US, followed by Australia, and then Germany, and then the 4th was China, which means that China, although is an important market, it's still relatively small even when you compare it to the US or Germany or Australia. The reason for that is in the top 3 markets that I mentioned, all the 3 markets have the right kind of conditions for end customers or the electric utilities to deploy storage. They're not there at a point where we see massive deployments, gigawatts of deployments in each of those countries, but they're relatively strong compared to China, where the Chinese government has looked at storage in their 13th 5-year plan, although hasn't invested significantly in storage yet. So the biggest focus for the Chinese government today on energy storage happens to be on the larger pumped hydro storage projects. And China has about 30 gigawatts of pumped hydro storage projects today. When you compare that to battery and other advanced forms of energy storage, we are only talking about few hundred megawatts. In the last 4 years, China has deployed about 380 odd megawatts of energy storage. It's peanuts compared to pumped hydro. However, now if we look forward into 2018 and beyond, the Chinese government is finally putting together a program around energy storage. It's twofold. It is focused on how to develop the technology, because keep in mind, energy storage, the main technology that drives the market are batteries, which are essentially the same technology that also is driving, no pun intended, the electric vehicles industry. So there are synergies that China can draw upon and is now finally looking to encourage energy storage projects in form of pilot scale deployments, in form of programs that would incentivize end customers, electric utilities, and market operators to deploy storage. So we are fairly bullish about the China market in the coming years, even though today it's a relatively smaller market.
In your report, you've mentioned that National Grid recently initiated the process of restructuring the ancillary service market in the UK.
That's right.
But then they canceled this. Do you know what the reason of it?
Yeah, so UK is an interesting market. It, in the last 3 years, has seen so much enthusiasm for energy storage. There was an enhanced frequency response auction back in 2014, 2015 timeframe when UK, the National Grid, which is a system operator in the UK, auctioned about 201 megawatts of energy storage for enhanced frequency response, which is fairly rapid sub-second frequency response. Now, since then, what National Grid has realized is instead of trying to run two different programs, one for enhanced frequency response and other for your general standard frequency response, it is trying to combine the two programs and come up with a policy that would still incentivize or still help storage get paid in the frequency response market, although it doesn't want to give unnecessarily high premiums for that service. So the other aspect of that is it's also a market that currently for frequency regulation, frequency response is fairly oversupplied. So there are a bunch of factors which have resulted in National Grid taking a much more deliberate, slow approach towards frequency response market sort of restructuring.
So what is the significance of balancing the storage market in the EU, do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. So keep in mind, right, the biggest sort of benefit of adding storage to your grid, well, there are a few actually, is it makes the grid more reliable and resilient. It achieves reliability by enabling the real-time or close to real-time balancing of the grid. What that means is the smaller the grid, it needs more balancing because it tends to be, a smaller grid tends to be more homogeneous. Whereas if you expand the grid, if we thinking about a grid that's harmonized across all the EU markets, you are effectively going to need less real-time balancing because you can pull in resources from Denmark, for example, and try to balance out what's going on in Germany. If it's let's say it's a cloudy day in Germany, you can still rely on some of the wind power that's coming from Denmark, for instance. So harmonization, it makes the grid more reliable, which acts in some ways like energy storage. But on the flip side, it also creates the right kind of mechanisms for energy storage to participate irrespective of where it's located. So it's going to have a sort of a dual effect. Harmonization is going to initially, at least in the initial periods, is going to encourage more energy storage participation, but from a longer term systems perspective, it reduces the overall need for storage eventually.
The legacy energy companies and the storage companies are having very crazy mergers and acquisitions.
That's right.
So after these crazy mergers and acquisition, will the price of the energy still be stable?
The short answer is yes. Any kind of acquisitions or any kind of consolidation eventually can result into efficient operations if you buy into that theory. But taking a step back, right? Let's see the type of acquisitions and the type of investments we've seen in the energy storage space. We've seen companies like Total buy Saft batteries. We've seen companies like Enel, NG invest into behind-the-meter storage companies, and broadly, even beyond storage, participate in more distributed energy resources. What that means is, again, that the grid is becoming more distributed, it's becoming more decarbonized, more digitized, right? All these activities eventually, again, tie back to what the end customer wants. So if these companies, which are seeing the future written on the wall, that the markets are going to shift pretty drastically, and they are trying to sort of get ahead of the game, or at least trying to play catch up in terms of this transition. So it's anybody's guess on what that future looks like, but these kind of early activities and investments by the larger traditional energy companies are an indication that the market eventually would move towards more distributed sort of framework. Now, you could argue, or we'd like to believe, that would eventually also mean cheaper energy. But again, it really depends on how does the transition actually, what pathway we end up taking.
Will it influence the Chinese storage market?
So China is an interesting country, not because it's my first time here, but it's an interesting country for multiple reasons. On storage side, as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, that it hasn't paid attention to storage as much. It has paid attention to electric vehicles, and for the right reasons, because electric vehicles again are arguably the future of transportation, and as a result of that, there has been a huge amount of investments supported by government to building large battery manufacturing facilities. Now, the same batteries can also be used for stationary storage. So again, there are ways in which China can make the grid more reliable and resilient, at the same time supporting the battery industry here.
What can we expect from the storage market of 2018?
Yeah, it's going to grow. The short answer. No, jokes apart. The things that we are definitely keeping an eye on is we saw early indications from the National Energy Administration here in China to finally put some thought into energy storage programs. So we'll see if that's followed by any kind of action in terms of actual investments or actual project deployments. We are also very much looking forward to how markets like Japan, South Korea, and Australia in particular, those three are evolving. Those three markets have very similar, not very similar, but relatively similar needs that energy storage can meet. We started to see South Korea as well as Japan provide a premium on their solar PPA or solar-based energy certificate programs if they add storage. Same thing is likely to happen in Australia, although Australia, given how sort of diverse the market is, with a lot of activity going on with respect to coal retirements and fast growth in renewables, both wind and solar. So again, we expect that there would be more solar plus storage or wind plus storage plans that would come up in Australia. But the question is going to be, what kind of business models shape up around those deployments. End of the day, you need the right kind of, sort of returns for the developer or the investor to add storage. Even if the storage is adding more value to the grid, if there aren't any right market signals, we won't see that level of investment. So it's again an interesting market to follow for that particular reason.
Thanks for watching Discovery TV. This is Ying Wang. I'll catch up next time.